My dad told me while I was walking down the street in San Francisco, he was like, I'm worried about you because you're old and you're alone and your dog's gonna die. And I'm like, Dad,
Thanks,
I know
Dad.
all these things.
Firstly, I really appreciate the words of support, Dad. Thank you.
Phrased only as a father could, right?
Yes, out of love. It was out of love. So I can't focus on everything that's wrong. We need people who are not going to yell at us when everything else is already going wrong. We need people who are going to stand beside us and help us strategize out of it.
Erin, it sounds like you have an investor base that, obviously believes and understands the challenges in the water sector.
Hello and welcome to The Stream, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarney, a water strategy consultant doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And on this second episode, as part of season 4, we are thrilled to be joined by Erin Rothman, who is the founder and CEO of StormSensor. Erin, great to see you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. So we've got lots to talk with you about. I'd say you are the guest we tried to look for, an entrepreneur with a bias for action. You're, building a business, a team, you've attracted investment. So loads we want to kind of tap into, but maybe to kind of get started, because we've done a couple of interviews before, but just for people to see your backstory, maybe you could give us a kind of summary on why you're on a mission to create the Google Maps of sewers and how you kind of started life as a consultant. And then someone said to you, Erin, you should go and do that. And you said, you know what? I'll go and build this company. And you did. But if you can give us the kind of concise history, that would be great just to get going. Thanks.
Sure. Although to clarify, no one told me that I should go build it and everyone told me that it was a terrible idea. So we'll start with that.
That's even better. So go and get yours.
Love it.
Yeah. Well, I was a consultant and we brought in a stormwater team. So my focus, I primarily worked with real estate developers to clean up contaminated sites in urban infills, so in cities. And we brought in a stormwater team to help with the construction stormwater compliance and then the industrial stormwater compliance too. And as our team grew and as our sites became more dispersed, our profit margins dropped dramatically and went into the red. And we couldn't figure out what was going on. And I asked my team, my guys in the field, and they said that every time they had to sample, or every time it rained at the office, they went to go sample other sites. But just because it was raining here doesn't mean it was raining there. And on average, we're like going out 4 times before we can build our time. So not conducive to consulting. And I said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Why don't we just have a rain gauge that texts us when it rains? And they said, why don't you go invent that? And I said, I will. I'm going to call it StormSensor. So that was in 2010-ish, before IoT was really a thing. And I didn't think anything of it because I didn't have a background in hardware or software. But I also didn't particularly enjoy consulting because you can do the most extraordinary job ever, but no one hires an environmental consultant because they want to. So it's because we have to.
It's not that you're speaking to 2 consultants, Erin. Don't worry about it.
But wait a minute, Erin. I'm shocked to hear this about consulting. That's a little bit of a joke. I mean, I've been a consultant forever, so you made me laugh with that comment because it is in fact true.
Well, on the environmental side too, it's so, if you have a contaminated site, you're terrified because your site's contaminated. You want to get a loan so you can redevelop it, but you can't get a loan until you clean it up. You don't know how much it's going to cost, and you don't know what's underground until you start digging. Yeah. So costs can just blow up. So it's just a generally miserable experience for the whole team. And then once you get to the bottom and you have all the data and everything looks great, the regulators can say, yeah, I know you might have followed the regulations, but I want something else. Sorry. And it's just.
I'm shocked that you gave all of that up.
I know, I wanted to find something to do that made me happy and where people wanted to work with me. for fun.
Brilliant.
What happened then?
move.
So you said the idea was kind of, people said you should go and create that, and you said StormSensor, and then kind of 4 years. What was the kind of the next stage to get the seed funding and really start it?
I decided to do it in 2014 when I was in San Francisco, where everyone was in a startup. So I said I was in one too, called StormSensor, because I want to be one of the cool kids. And then I realized that maybe I could actually do that. I talked to accelerators in the Bay Area and then in Seattle to understand what they were looking for in companies that go into their program and companies that come out, because this whole concept was just completely foreign to me. And we got into an accelerator in Seattle. It blew my mind that they were giving me $35,000 for what was basically an idea. And that kind of got things moving. I was focused on industrial stormwater compliance at the beginning because that was my background. But then once I started talking to cities, they said that they didn't need pH and turbidity and conductivity, like all those other parameters. What they needed was to understand how much water is moving through their sewer and storm systems. And I was like, well, what do you mean you don't know how much water is moving? They're like, oh yeah, we have no idea. We can model it. If your sensors are accurate within 30% or so, that would be great. I was like, are you serious? I didn't understand. But I did realize that if we removed all the chemical parameters, we focused on the municipal market, we basically metered that last unmetered utility, created the Google traffic maps of sewers, then we could deploy these sensors at scale. Instead of like one at one property, we do tens or hundreds or thousands across the city. And then that allows us to ultimately really map how water is moving through these systems, and then how climate impacts are affecting what's happening within these systems, both above and below ground. And then it's all just very exciting from there.
Very, very cool. Seems to me you kind of started with a wider focus. Like, we want to monitor different parts of water quality, and actually kind of to get going that first stage of the company, you moved down to just quantity in terms of the flows of water.
Industrial and stormwater compliance, which is really a smaller market that also has a significant need. But in order to manufacture the sensors, I mean, it's just so expensive, which is,
right.
And we're not a sensor company per se, we're a data company that developed our own sensors because so many sensors are so expensive. So this allowed us to really focus on a much broader scale need, and also incorporate climate change and climate adaptation into our value proposition.
With the more you measure, the more ultimately that sensor costs, right? So
Exactly. And the more battery life it takes, and the harder it is to install, and the more frequently it breaks, so the harder it is to maintain. All of those costs go into it, which make scaling very difficult.
Very cool. So if you, the last time we spoke, if you kind of fast forward from 2014 to where we are today, you've just raised 10 million Series A, right? Yep. You've now got a team of just under 40 people.
Yes, it's crazy.
Which is crazy, right?
Yes, it's amazing and terrifying and amazing.
Is that kind of, when you say that out loud, like a team of 40 people, does that kind of like still come as a bit of a shock, or?
Yeah, I have a small bit of anxiety and delight every time I think about it.
It sounds like a good mixture to have, right? Yeah.
It is.
Fear motivates. That's good.
I was once asked by a regulator why I did such a good job, or why my projects were so spot on the consulting side. And I said, because I'm terrified I'm going to fail. He's like, well, I wish everyone was as terrified as you were. But I use that now, even now. It's very effective.
I think that might be a key quote in this podcast, by the way.
Excellent.
I think fear of failure is a good driver of any entrepreneur, right? And you've obviously been involved in every element of the business. So as things are now, you've got another round of funding, you're taking on more people. Mm-hmm. Would you find one of the hardest things is being able to kind of relinquish control and kind of delegate and take your eyes off certain bits? Because inevitably you have to when you start scaling and put in a process and infrastructure. But often that's the hardest bit as an entrepreneur from the beginning, is to kind of just take control, give control away a little bit.
If I have people I can trust, then they are more than happy to take it. Because as I've gone through this process, I feel like I'm not actually good at most things, but what I am good at, I can have an idea I'm lucky to be able to find a team of brilliant people to work on it, and they take this germ of an idea and turn it into something extraordinary. So if I insisted on controlling everything, we would be a tenth of where we are right now. And that's not good.
Erin, that strikes me as such a key issue for startups in a lot of ways. So, founder, CEO, in I don't want to say many, but probably more cases than I want to admit, believe that they can do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the successful ones absolutely know that I'm the founder CEO, but I'm maybe better at being a CTO. So let me go find a CEO. So that ability to have that reality check and build a team, I think is extraordinary in terms of getting it right and being successful, and probably had a lot to do with your ability to raise capital. That was a compliment, by the way. So
thank you. I appreciate that. And I did want to go back to something that you said about fear of failure, because I think there's this thing about failure. And when I just remember sitting around a table in Techstars in our CEO roundtable, and everyone talked about how scared they were to fail. And what if their company failed? And before I started StormSensor, I was quote unquote happily married. I was vice president of a consulting company. I owned a home in Seattle, Washington. Like, on the outside, my life was beautiful, and I was absolutely miserable. And I, at that point, had failed because I wanted to be happy, and I couldn't do it. So I ended up walking away from everything that year in 2014, and sold the house and got divorced, and started this company, which is insane. And my dad told me while I was walking down the street in San Francisco, he's like, I'm worried about you because you're old and you're alone and your dog's gonna die. And I'm like, Dad,
thanks,
I know
Dad.
all these things.
Firstly, I really appreciate the words of support, Dad. Thank you. Yeah.
Phrased only as a father could, right?
Yes, out of love. It was out of love. And I was like, I can't focus on everything that's wrong. But I got out of all of that. I had my mantra that I wrote that I wanted to be as my aspirational mantra, which is always move forward and always with creativity, kindness, compassion, and joy. That's what I wanted. And I wrote that, and I looked at it every day. It's right here. And I got through that, and that made me a success, or that I was successful. And at every point in our company where we've almost failed, or even when we have failed, we still got to here. So I cannot imagine, even if the whole world comes crashing down and we run out of money tomorrow, it's still not a failure, because unlike 99% of people who try to think, we got to here, and that is awesome. And that's what I try to tell myself on a regular basis.
First of all, love the mantra. I think that's remarkable to kind of have that every day to keep driving you. And also, as we mentioned, love the words of encouragement from your dad. I hear the similar things from regular phone calls with my dad. Hi, if you're listening, Dad. Yeah, Tom, you're getting old. Come on. Yeah, I think that's kind of a common dad advice, isn't it?
I have 3 sons, so this sort of resonates with me. And I usually start my conversation with, I don't mean to lecture you or give you advice.
Right.
However, it's like, oh, gee, I fell into that one again. How terrible.
But I think it's that having that dogged determination, Erin, because I think when I first interviewed you, it was during the first year of the pandemic. Oh. And it was after you'd lined up almost 5 million of investment. And then kind of a lot of investors were like, holy shit, we've got a pandemic, and they pulled the plug, and you were left having to pay payroll without kind of the investment in the bank. And you're like, we used all my life savings and you spent kind of 15 hours a day for 5 days to investors you'd never met, using Zoom because you couldn't meet people, to basically get the money in. And then eventually you found success, and you kind of got additional investment in, you managed to make payroll and keep the company going. But I think it's that kind of dogged determination that a lot of entrepreneurs perhaps fail if they don't have it, because you've got no choice but to succeed, right?
That is true. And I did have to furlough my team for a month. So I could not make payroll, and everyone stayed. And then I paid them back.
Awesome.
Called a retention bonus.
Nice.
Yeah.
Hey, Erin, I've got a question. You brought up something about climate change, and I want to ask if you thinking or framing yourself as a data company and a company that is in part addressing the impacts of climate change, was that sort of a pivotal moment in terms of fundraising, considering, you know, the increased attention on climate change and the intersection with water and so on?
It was actually. So we rebranded ourselves as a climate tech company after we did raise that $2 million, called a seed 2 in 2020. And that allowed us to do a couple of things. So first off, it broadened us beyond water, as far as investors are concerned, of course, but it also helped us as a company kind of internalize the fact that what we were doing ties to climate change and climate adaptation. And that made a lot of the work that we were doing much more meaningful to the people who were working with us, because they wanted to have an impact on climate. And then going into last year, when we, I guess 2020, I don't even know the years. Yes, last year's 2021. So we did a bridge to the A, and I hired some phenomenal people. So we were 8 people at this time last year. In March, we had 16 people. And I basically blew that whole 16 million or $1.6 million on new hires and making sure our shit worked and getting that out in the field. So when we opened the A in May, June, we were just flying. Problem was that if we kept flying at that rate, we were going to be out of money again in September. So, but it worked. And the bulk of our investors are on the climate side and impact.
That's really interesting. So it sounds like that was a really pretty significant turning point, and also the ability to have a broader value proposition in the marketplace.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like, it broadened the value proposition while at the same time clarifying our mission.
Right.
That makes
Right.
sense. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
And I love the part where you said in terms of hiring. I mean, being a climate tech company, the purpose that you're positioning the business to actually attract the new talent and the right talent.
right.
I'm not saying that positioning it as a water tech doesn't, but actually water tech as part of the climate tech portfolio probably no doubt helped with the hiring process as well.
Very much so. And I mean, for example, the data scientists that we hired, they're all stormwater hydrology, but they wanted to tie it to something bigger, and we get to do that. So it's very cool.
Very cool. So in terms of the investment, and I know you used the word, well, look, I blew the money on this. I think invested is fine. Just in case any investors are listening, she strategically invested into this. Exactly.
Yes. But if it was wrong, then it would be.
Yeah, it's not blown smoke. But you've obviously spoken to a lot of different investors, different venture capitalists to PE. And it'll be interesting just to know from your point of view, because it needs to be a two-way relationship, right? When you get the right investors into StormSensor, whether impact investor or sustainability investors, it's a partnership to work kind of hand in hand and move forward. So I'd love to hear from you kind of any warning signs or red flags that you've seen from speaking with investors. You think, actually, you guys, you might be able to back us, but you're not the right partner for us. Have you got any kind of stories that come to mind on that?
Yeah, I would say the biggest red flag for us is when someone asks what our MAUs are. And the first time I was like, what's an MAU? So monthly active user, and they want to see that number skyrocket. I'm like, well, our users are more active when it rains, and we're working with 20 cities. So we're not at the 2 million, like it's a scale issue. So that if they're looking for a B2C SaaS company, we are not that. If I've had investors ask if we could gamify our solution. And
that old chestnut, yeah.
And it's possible, I'm sure, but that's not the problem that we're solving. So on the outset, a lot of times investors will ask questions about, what if you did this with your company, or what if you did that? And if they're asking me to gamify it, or ask if we can have exponential growth in MAUs, then I know we're not on the same page, because when you're building a water or a climate tech company, oftentimes it's a huge problem and it's very difficult and it takes time. And we want partners who understand the investment in time that we are making to have a major impact across the world. And it's not going to be exponential growth in MAUs in the next 6 to 9 months.
Right, you're not building a Netflix or a Fortnite where it's
No.
based on that monthly
No.
users drastically going up.
No, sometimes I wonder why I'm not, but for the most part,
Oh, don't
reminded.
do that. Don't do that.
Every once in a while, like, how do these people get investments? Yeah.
Very cool. So in terms of then where you're taking the company, actually, let's go back, because we spoke about the red flags with investors, but maybe some of the investors, what about the green flags, things that you tried to partner with? I'd like to hear on the other side of the coin as well, maybe.
Yeah, so the way I look at it is when we qualify leads, for example, for sales, we do the same thing with our investors. So I went through and identified and talked to anyone and everyone who listened to me and asked for contacts. And we identified about 200 climate or impact or woman-focused investors. We look for companies, or I guess funds, that are not necessarily terrified of hardware, because we are an IoT-enabled SaaS company.
Mm-hmm.
We've look at the types of companies they've invested in, and a lot of times they'll say their impact, but it's all SaaS, like straight SaaS and B2C SaaS. So we'll kick those out pretty early in the qualification process. But it was it's a pretty intensive effort that I make to make sure I'm talking to the right investors, because I've made some mistakes previously. And when I have a conversation with them and we start talking about what we're doing, and they get just as excited as I am, and we're both bouncing on our seats, and it's just the coolest thing when we talk about all the things that we can do together, that's awesome. And those are the investors that we've been lucky to work with.
I guess the due diligence needs to check out, and you guys have to hit your KPIs, but ultimately you're looking for that initial chemistry, because there's still people investing in people ultimately, isn't it? Same time.
And really understanding what we're doing and why it's awesome that we have 20 customers instead of 200,000 customers after 5 years. And yeah, all of that, it makes such a big difference. And then the world goes wrong, and we've got more COVID, and inflation's looking like it's going to be a thing. We have supply chain issues unlike anything we've ever seen before. Like, it's a fascinating time. So when something goes wrong, I've also always asked investors, what happens when something goes wrong? What do you do to help your companies? Mm-hmm. Because we need people who are not going to yell at us when everything else is already going wrong. We need people who are going to stand beside us and help us strategize out of it.
Erin, it sounds like you have an investor base that, obviously believes and understands the challenges in the water sector. I assume that your investor community, views this as a two-way street. So when you have a supply chain challenge, you can tap into them and ask them for, all right, you've invested in a number of other companies. How are they handling it? So using that as a resource base and essentially an extension of your team.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really powerful. And you wouldn't see that if it was just someone who was just making an investment but didn't believe. It's,
Right.
What's your return? Why not a hockey stick, whatever it may be? I think they would not be as engaged in terms of helping you solve some of the challenges that we're seeing right now.
Certainly. Just going back to fear, investors also have a fear of failure. So I want to know how scared they can get before they.
That's a good test. That's on the first conversation.
How much does this market scare you? What do you really want? When is that point?
That's really good.
Love it. A reality test on the first call. Like, how scared can you be?
Yes.
The other reason we wanted to speak with you, Erin, is we mentioned that bias for action, but also define the odds. And in the previous time we've spoken, you said, was it an investor or a potential partner asked for a picture of you, and you've got this picture that's done the rounds of in the hard hat. And the comment that came back was, that's not how female CEOs should dress. And that was perhaps a major red flag. So first of all, you don't have to name and shame who said that, of course. Okay. But I mean, in terms of how you responded to that, how did that kind of make you feel?
Well, she had sent me a picture of what a CEO should look like and how a CEO should dress. And she sent me a picture of a dude wearing a suit. And I'm like, I can't.
Come on.
I said,
no.
thank you for your feedback. I will take it into consideration. And that was it. Because what am I supposed
Wow.
to? But I've had, especially before I raised a lot of money, I've had a lot of comments on my appearance and my clothes and my hair that all kind of toned down a bit once I raised a couple $1 million. So it's been an interesting process.
Yeah,
And
I mean, well, firstly, applaud how polite you were to the lady who said that.
Yeah,
I think
I'm shocked.
Will, we might have, I wouldn't say use some expletives, but hats off for being so polite. But it's still frustrating that, you know, you potentially have to modify appearance in order to gain investment and then go back to how you were beforehand. That's still crazy to me.
Well, it's really interesting too, because I've been thinking about this, and I had, like, I would try so hard when I was so terrified when I pitch investors, and I would wear like heels and slacks, and I do my hair, which I don't do because it takes forever. And then I get feedback that my hair looked like this and my clothes are distracting. I'm like, I'm wearing a blouse and slacks. So, but I would try so hard, and I was so uncomfortable. And one day I was on the way to a customer site and I had to pitch, and I asked if it was okay if I wore my field gear, and I had my steel-toed boots and my thermal shirt and my working jeans on.
Awesome.
I was great. I was so comfortable. And I was like, holy shit. So if I just dress the way I want and I'm confident because I'm comfortable in myself, I'm not putting on a show, all of a sudden my presentation gets a lot better and people stop questioning me and telling me I should do even better to look better without being extremely attractive or some such nonsense.
That's really important advice. I mean, you know, something as clear and simple as that in terms of be comfortable and confident as opposed to trying to look and feel the way somebody believes you should.
Right.
You know, that's really, really important advice in my mind.
Well, and I also realized these are long-term relationships, and they're going to be real disappointed when they see me when I'm not wearing the clothes they expect me to wear. So I figure we might as well get that out of the way at the beginning. And it's not like I dress like a schlump. I mean, I wear nice clothes and I bathe on a daily basis.
So Tom, I really do feel like we kind of blew it, and that we did not wear a hard hat during this pod. No, really. Do you think maybe we could Photoshop it in or something?
We'll speak to Charles, the video editor. Yeah, maybe the hard hat with the StormSensor on there.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, I mean, Erin, you said you look for warning signs in investors and you test how much fear they can take if things go wrong. I think sod it. I think that if that's how you feel comfortable, and if that's going to eliminate from the 200, the 10 that are willing to back you and see who you are, I mean, you know, why not? But yeah, that's really interesting to hear. And I think it's a bit of a shame that still happens. But for the final few minutes, then tell us kind of what's to come from you in this year, 22, 23. You mentioned previously how you're going to kind of morph, develop a new product as part of the company, right?
Yeah, so what we're really doing now is focusing on the insights that come out of the data that we're capturing. So, and I mentioned it earlier, where we're actually tying climate data to what's happening below ground and looking at comparing or combining really climate intelligence with critical infrastructure, and then allowing cities to identify how they can best take action. And we're doing that on one hand with our new risk analysis is coming out, our Stormwater Urban Flood Risk Index, where we pull in data, not just physical or geographic data, but also socioeconomic parameters as well, because that's a really good indicator of where issues are within a city. And then also in poorer areas, for example, those people can't bounce back as quickly as others if they don't have the insurance, and they can't get to work or they can't get to school. So helping cities really focus on communities and areas that need it most, tying that to real data, and then pulling in the overall climate intelligence into that as well. So we all know what we can do as individuals, but then also communities, and then also regionally, the best steps that we can take to make a difference.
That's really interesting, isn't it? It's a social economic data piece of that puzzle.
Mm.
So it's giving a more realistic view on
Exactly.
what solutions need to happen at a community level, right?
And I was really nervous. We showed a surfer, we sold an index to a community in Florida, and it was opposite FEMA. Like our risk was screaming high in one area and completely de-risked what FEMA had identified as an issue. And I was so nervous. I was like, I don't know, is this right? And they were so happy. They're like, we have never seen something that actually reflects reality. This is what we're dealing with. And they are using that for planning and zoning now. So it's just
Awesome.
cool to see how the ideas that we have and the data that we pull together and the insights, all of it comes together to actually solve real problems.
Amazing. So it's a pretty powerful sort of algorithm you're developing then to sort of cross-reference many different data sets and then get something they can act on, the actionable data, right?
Exactly.
Very cool. So in terms of the company, like hiring more people, more investment, obviously that's part of the pipeline of growth for the next couple of years as well.
Yes. So we're looking at what that next round of investment looks like. And we're going to hold stable since we just hired, 30 people. We're going to hold stable on that for at least a few months. Although you find amazing people. I can't turn them down. No. Yeah, so we're putting all that together now. We actually have our first board meeting of the year later this week to kind of lay down that strategy.
Amazing. Well, we always kind of ask people, how can we possibly help in the journey? So if people are listening or watching and they love what Erin's got to say, feel free to reach out if we can connect them in any way, happy to help.
Absolutely. Yeah. If working with communities is our focus. So if you live in a community that you think can benefit, we would love to help.
Very cool.
Okay.
Good. Well, Will, any kind of comments from you, reflections, thoughts?
So yes, but I'll keep it to 3. Your comments about investors, your screening. So, investor selection is a two-way street, clearly. And I see that as absolutely invaluable advice. Be true to yourself, be genuine, trying to be someone who you think they want is not a good strategy, doesn't play out well. And the
Leads
third,
to disappointment on all sides.
what's that?
Leads to disappointment on all sides.
Yeah, exactly. And life is short. And, some variation of fear motivates. It sharpens the mind. It's not a bad thing. So, yeah, you had some real nuggets.
Thank you.
Very cool. Well, Erin, really appreciate your time. I think it's always good to kind of catch up and see where you are on that journey. Random question. I don't know if Will, you can chip in on as well, but I was thinking, when does, somebody asked me the other day and I wasn't able to give them a kind of clear answer. When does a startup become a scale up? At what point in the journey are you expecting, I know maybe just a curveball to end it, throw it at the end, but what level of scale does that change? Is it between the series B and C? I mean, I wasn't able to answer. I'm just interested to know if you guys have any insight on that.
We're looking at ourselves as post-startup phase now. So after the A, we raise a substantial amount of money that puts us into growth mode.
I would just add,
all that.
Sorry to cut you off. I would just add that, what we're seeing is that the distinction between an A round, seed A round is getting blurry and in some ways less important. And I think you referred to that when you said seed 2.0 or something to that effect, which is
right.
Yeah, it's like, it's the round I raised last January, whatever you want to call it. So I don't know. I think that's a good question, Tom. Maybe that will undergo quite a bit of transition over, this year. I don't know.
Yeah, probably the landscape is shifting on the definition a little bit. Good. All right. Well, Erin, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for giving us the update on the journey. Best of luck as you continue. And I think, continue to wear that hard hat. And it's like Will said, be true to yourself, because it's really encouraging to see you, continue to grow that solution and against in the pandemic with various challenges going on. So appreciate the time. Thank you for joining us on the stream.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. It was wonderful to see you.
Erin, thanks so much.